Known as the Prince of Poisoners, William Palmer was a doctor who lived in the Victorian era, and his case is one of the most bizarre cases of that time. Even more so because the case of Jack the Ripper is the most notorious case of the 19th century. Hey there, my shipwrecked friends of this channel, welcome to another long video on this channel. Today we're going to talk about William Palmer, who was a doctor that used his knowledge to do things. One of the greatest tragedies that ever happened within a family, and even more so with his own family. I believe I'm the first Brazilian creator to cover this case because I did some research and couldn't find this case on other channels. If you've seen any Brazilian creator discuss this case, let me know in the comments. I'm interested because I've never seen it before. But if no Brazilian creator has covered this case until now, then I'll bring it exclusively for you, and this is today's case, so come with me. William Palmer was an English doctor who was born on August 6, 1824. This was in the city of Staffordshire in the United Kingdom during the Victorian era, which was one of the darkest times in the United Kingdom's history. He was the son of Sarah and Joseph Palmer, and he graduated as a doctor. William had a very extravagant lifestyle, and his academic life, his studies, were interrupted by several scandals. These always involved money. And he was also a very womanizing person, so he ended up going out with several women. At 17 years old, he was already dismissed from a job internship he had. That's because he was accused of fraud. And besides that, he also had to run away from another internship soon after because he was accused of performing abortions during the internship. He helped other women have abortions. He got a job as a nurse at the Stafford Infirmary, and during the time he was working at the infirmary, he went with an acquaintance, a co-worker of his, to a drinking contest that was quite common at that time. And he was accused of poisoning this co-worker of his during that contest. The infirmary, the hospital, opened an investigation, but nothing was proven. But because of that, they ended up making things stricter inside the hospital. In 1846, finally, he graduated as a doctor. He ended up graduating as a doctor at St. Bartholomew's Hospital after he finished his medical studies. He went back to Hudley, which was the city where he was born, his hometown. That was so he could start working as a doctor. There, he ended up meeting Anne Thornton, whom he married on October 26, 1847 at St. Church. But neither his medical career nor their marriage was going well. That's because he was someone who really liked gambling, so he liked to bet a lot on horse races. And that made both his relationship and even his work become troubled, because he cared much more about betting on games than taking care of his patients. Besides all these controversies in his life, he was still a person who didn't have any luck at all. That's because almost always when he placed his bets, he ended up losing, and because of that, he ended up getting into a lot of gambling debt, and he had a lot of gambling debts. That's because he would borrow money to go and gamble, and he ended up losing, so he couldn't get that money back and ended up in debt because of it. And that's where we're going to start seeing these controversies and this mess within his own family. That's right. He attacked, and he had the courage to do what I'm about to tell you with his own family. It all started then with his mother-in-law. That's because he was in debt, and he asked his mother-in-law for a lot of money. And there came a point when she started to stop lending him money. She started to refuse to lend him money. With that, on January 18, 1849, his mother-in-law, whose name was Anne Mary Thornton, ended up visiting her family and daughter at their house where they lived. And he ended up poisoning her and killing her with the poison. With this death, William's wife ended up inheriting all that fortune, and he managed to get his financial life back on track and regularize it. William's family had a friend named Leonard Blunden. He ended up going to William's house and spending some time there. And with that, on May 10, 1950, he ended up mysteriously dying of poisoning inside his house. And that's a very strange thing, because everyone who got close to William, who was near William, ended up dying, and always by poisoning. So we have a theory that the people who got close to him always ended up discovering something. If he found out someone had discovered something, he'd go there and poison them. William and Anne had 5 children, and well, believe it or not, out of those 5 children, only one survived William's wickedness. That's because Brooks Palmer, who was William's first son, was born in 1848 and only died in 1926. But that was exclusive to him because the other 4 children suffered. Elizabeth Palmer was 2.5 months old when she died of poisoning, and Henrique Palmer was about 7 months old when he also died of poisoning. Frank Palmer was only 7 hours old when he also died of poisoning. And Jerome Palmer was 3 to 4 days old when he also died of poisoning. In other words, these 4 children didn't make it past childhood, and that's because William didn't allow it. He was always really obsessed with money, and back then it was a very complicated time. Women couldn't say much. We also don't really know much about the story. Deep down, we don't know what his wife's reaction was to the deaths of their children. So back then, everything about this part of the story is kind of unclear and tangled. What we do know is that after all this, he decided to take out a life insurance policy for his wife, right? If I were her, I would be really, really, really worried. Because after everything that happened, for him to go and take out a life insurance policy is a dead giveaway, right? In October 1852, William ends up killing his uncle, right? Also from the family, but since he was an older gentleman, this was a case that kind of just faded away. They didn't end up being that suspicious, right? At that time, William was also involved with a maid from their house, right? Her name was Elisa Thummer, and he ended up having a child with her, right? A child with her who would be named Alfred Palmer. Then in 1854, 2 years after his uncle's death, his wife ends up dying, right? He ends up killing her as well by poisoning. And then the suspicion started, right? Of course, with his wife's death, he ended up receiving the life insurance. That's because his wife's death was linked to the cholera epidemic that was happening at the time, right? So they associated that death with the cholera epidemic, and then the insurance ended up paying out. Soon after, he decided to take out insurance for his brother as well. His name was Walter Palmer. So after he took out insurance for his brother, he ended up killing him as well. His brother was poisoned in 1855, a year after his wife's death. Because of that, the insurance company denied the payment. The insurance didn't accept, right, this story, and they started the investigations. At this point, he was already in debt again. He was full of debts. And he ends up meeting a young woman, right, who was the daughter of the police officer in the city. So she ends up discovering the things he was doing, and she ended up blackmailing him with this discovery she made. During the period from November 13th to 15th, 1855, William ended up going out with a friend, right, whose name was John Parsons Scott. They went out together. To bet on horses, like I said at the beginning of the video, he really liked making this kind of bet. So the two of them end up making a bet, right, on different horses, and William ended up losing a large amount on a horse he bet on. But his friend ended up winning. He won a great fortune on that bet he made, right? So once again, William was unlucky and his friend was lucky. So they go out to celebrate his friend's victory, right? And his friend ends up feeling sick, right? And the people there suspected that he had drunk too much cognac, right? Little did they know why he was feeling sick. On November 15th, 1855, they end up returning to Hugley. With that, his friend John was already feeling sick, so they ended up going to a hotel. He started staying in bed, and that was because of the poisoning. Then, by coincidence, on November 17th, 1855, his son, who is the son I mentioned that he had with his maid back when she was his lover, by coincidence, he also ended up dying very young, and that ended up leaving people very confused. Then on November 18th, the maid who was at the hotel where they were staying, she ended up tasting the food that belonged to John, his friend, and she also ended up feeling sick because of it. Given the condition John was in, he was very ill. He couldn't go to London on November 21, 1855 to claim his prize from the bet. So William went to London on the 21st to collect the prize. and he left his friend there on November 21, 1855, 2 days after William gathered the strength to do so. His friend John, the owner of that fortune, also ended up dying from poisoning after John's death and his son's death, which happened very close together. The police started this investigation, right? And on November 29, 1855, they opened this inquiry, which was closed on December 15, 1855. And for John's death, William was indicted for intentional murder, and so he ended up being arrested. The bodies of Anne and Walter were also exhumed. Anne was William's ex-wife, and Walter was William's brother. They were also exhumed so the police could investigate if there was any evidence of poisoning. But with the medicine of that time, they couldn't find out and couldn't link those deaths to William. But everyone knows, right, that it was William's fault too, that it was due to poisoning. Well, despite the similarity of these deaths being circumstantial, they already had everything they needed to indict William, right? That's because of all those horrible deaths, all by poisoning and all around William, right? Both family and friends, everyone. So that was enough information for them to indict William. He was sentenced to death by hanging, and he was hanged in a public square. William's death happened on July 14, 1855. He was hanged at the Stanford prison, and about 30,000 people watched the hanging. Man, the guy, he was so crazy that his last words when he saw he was going to be hanged there, right? While waiting, his last words were, "Are you sure this is safe? Look how crazy with all those deaths," right? He ended up getting the famous name, the Prince of Poisoners. The substance he used on all his victims was the same, right? All his victims always died from poisoning, and the substance used was strychnine. His victims were always men, women, children, relatives, and also creditors. It's never really known exactly how many people he killed in his life, but what is known is that he killed a lot of people. At the time, he was called the greatest villain who ever existed in Old Bailey. This case resulted in a movie called The Life and Crime of William Palmer. I'll leave the name here. This movie is from 1988, and it also tells this story. It's a really crazy story, right, guys? Really wild, this story. It's a story that doesn't have much information, but with the information we have, we tried to share it with you. So I want you to leave in the comments, what was the weirdest part of this story that you found? And also, if you have other suggestions for stories from that time, which are stories I really enjoy telling, leave them here in the comments and I'll look them up and tell them to you. All right, guys? This was another case here on my channel, so if you like the case, leave your like. It's really important for spreading this video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any new videos. And also follow me on social media, which I'll leave here on the screen for you, my social media accounts. Thank you so much for making it this far with me, and see you in the next video. I'm out.